Friends, thank you for being here today. What happens when the world's largest economy threatens its closest, most integrated ally with crippling 25% tariffs? A full-blown geopolitical chessboard is being set up right before our eyes, and the internet is absolutely exploding with a narrative that Washington is walking blindly into a devastating trap. Are we witnessing a masterclass in economic diversion that will leave the United States completely isolated? Or is this just the beginning of a catastrophic trade war that will rewrite the global order? Right now, a massive wave of information, including supposed secret mega deals and viral quotes from legendary billionaires, is circulating rapidly across social media. We need to pause right here. This current frenzy contains a mix of hard economic realities and speculative fiction. Here is your disclaimer. Much of the viral narrative regarding secret, overnight Canadian trade agreements is currently just unverified rumor and speculation. Many experts have debunked the idea that an economy can pivot overnight. But we have to ask the critical question, why is the market still panicking? Why is Wall Street paying attention to these rumors? Because the underlying threat of this trade war is terrifyingly real, and the profound vulnerability it exposes within the American economy is 100% accurate. To really understand what's happening, we have to look past the noise and dissect the hard facts. According to official reports from recent weeks, the Trump administration has aggressively threatened to slap massive, across-the-board 25% tariffs on all Canadian goods. This is a staggering proposition. We are talking about the administration treating a long-standing, deeply integrated partner, a country that shares the longest demilitarized border in the world, like a hostile economic combatant. The undeniable reality is that this impulsive, erratic posturing is already sending massive shockwaves through North American supply chains, deeply unnerving investors, and threatening the livelihoods of millions of American workers. The political strategy coming out of Washington seems predicated on a deeply flawed assumption that Canada is entirely dependent, that Canada is weak, and that when faced with overwhelming American economic pressure, Ottawa will simply fold and accept whatever terms are dictated to them. But instead of folding, a fascinating, highly sophisticated, and incredibly disruptive narrative is taking over international trade circles. According to some rumors, top Canadian economic strategists, with names like former central banker Mark Carney frequently thrown into the mix as the supposed architect, are quietly orchestrating a massive, historic pivot away from U.S. dependency. Suppose in a hypothetical scenario, Ottawa actually managed to spend the last few months operating in complete stealth, bypassing Washington entirely, and secretly negotiating direct, preferential trade arrangements with the European Union, Japan, South Korea, and even China. Although there is no concrete evidence that a magical 40% reduction in U.S. trade dependency just went live overnight, as some viral posts claim, the mere concept of this alternative trade architecture is making international investors sweat. It is a brilliant thought experiment that exposes the fatal flaw in Washington's entire tariff strategy. The internet is obsessed with this idea because it represents the ultimate David and Goliath scenario, where intellect and strategic foresight outmaneuver brute force and bluster. People are sharing these stories because they intuitively understand that Washington's bullying tactics might actually push Canada to do exactly this, to build a fortress of redundancy that leaves the United States out in the cold. Adding fuel to this fire is a controversial perspective, gaining massive traction online right now. A supposed widely shared quote attributed to the Oracle of Omaha himself, Warren Buffett. The rumor claims Buffett stated that the United States is learning an expensive lesson about underestimating Canada, warning that blowing up a 75-year relationship based on impulse will result in the market teaching you a brutal reality. Now, we must be absolutely clear and responsible here. We must debunk this specific piece of internet lore. There is no public record, no verified interview, and no credible financial news outlet confirming that Warren Buffett ever said these exact words regarding this specific Canada-US tariff situation. It is an internet fabrication. But why did this fake quote go viral? Why did millions of people, including seasoned investors, instinctively believe it? Because it perfectly articulates a profound economic truth. It strikes a deep collective nerve because it highlights an uncomfortable, undeniable reality about the fragility of the American economy. The market believes the sentiment of the fake quote because the math behind the anxiety is absolutely real. Let me ask you right now, are you buying into the panic, or do you think the market is overreacting? Let me know in the comments below. I want to see what you guys think. Latest data indicates that American manufacturing, construction, agricultural, and automotive sectors are not just vaguely connected to Canada. They are inextricably, structurally fused to Canadian resources. You cannot simply bully a country that holds the very keys to your economic engine. The undeniable reality is that the U.S. infrastructure, particularly in the northern and Midwestern states, relies heavily on a continuous, uninterrupted flow of Canadian energy, Canadian lumber, Canadian minerals, and Canadian generic pharmaceuticals. If we actually peel back the layers of this dependency, you quickly realize that a 25% tariff isn't a weapon against Canada. It's a massive, self-inflicted wound for the United States. Just think about the cars we drive. The direct consequence of this decision will be a devastating domino effect for the American working class and the massive manufacturing hubs in Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana. We are talking about the big three automakers facing unprecedented part shortages and astronomical cost increases. The North American auto supply chain is built on a just-in-time manufacturing model. A single car part, say a transmission component or a specialized semiconductor housing, might cross the US-Canada border 6 or 7 times before the final vehicle rolls off the assembly line in Detroit. If you slap a 25% tariff on that border, you are not just taxing a finished product. You are multiplying a massive tax across every single step of the manufacturing process. The undeniable reality is that this will immediately halt production lines. American auto workers will face furloughs, and the cost of a new vehicle for the American consumer will skyrocket out of reach. The assumption that the U.S. can just source these parts domestically overnight is an economic fantasy. The factories do not exist. The workforce is not trained. The supply chains are not there. If you work in manufacturing, auto, or logistics, how is your company preparing for this disruption? Sound off in the comments. I want to hear what's actually happening on the ground. And the pain doesn't stop at the auto lot. It bleeds directly into our neighborhoods and the housing market. According to official reports, the United States relies massively on Canadian softwood lumber to build American homes. Right now, America is already facing a severe housing affordability crisis. Millions of young Americans cannot afford to buy their first home. If Washington imposes these tariffs, the direct consequence of this decision will be a massive spike in material costs. We are talking about an immediate double-digit percentage increase in the cost of basic construction materials. And what if Canada decides to look elsewhere? Suppose in a hypothetical scenario, Canadian suppliers, frustrated by the erratic nature of American trade policy, decide to legally redirect their lumber to booming Asian markets or European buyers offering long-term, stable contracts. The American construction industry would be crippled. Home building would stall, contractors would go out of business, and the dream of home ownership would be pushed even further away for the average American family. But perhaps the most terrifying vulnerability hiding in plain sight is how we power our lives. Let's talk about how Americans keep their lights on and their homes warm. There is a persistent, dangerous myth in certain political circles regarding complete American energy independence. The undeniable reality is that the U.S. energy infrastructure, particularly in the northern tier of the country, is fundamentally built around Canadian imports. You cannot just magically flip a switch and redirect international energy pipelines. It defies the laws of physics and economics. Look at pipelines like Line 5, which supplies a massive percentage of the crude oil and natural gas liquids required to heat homes and power businesses in Michigan, Minnesota, and the broader Midwest. If tariffs disrupt this flow, or if Canadian energy producers are incentivized to aggressively build out export terminals to send their energy to Europe or Asia, the impact on the American consumer will be immediate and severe. The direct consequence of this decision will be that home heating costs in the dead of winter will skyrocket. We are not talking about a few cents at the gas pump. We are talking about families having to choose between buying groceries and heating their homes. Are you already seeing your heating and utility bills go up? Tell me which state you're watching from and what you're paying right now down in the comments. Beyond our homes and our cars, there is another critical lifeline on the line: our healthcare. Latest data indicates that Canada produces a highly significant percentage of the generic medications and crucial chemical precursors that American pharmacies rely on daily. These are the drugs that manage blood pressure, treat infections, and keep millions of Americans alive. If trade relations completely break down, and if supply chains are disrupted by punitive tariffs, the United States could face acute shortages of essential life-saving medications. This transcends economic statistics. This becomes a literal matter of life and death. When you start stacking up these economic hits, the political narrative in Washington inevitably begins to fracture. The architects of this aggressive tariff policy operate under the assumption that this will look like a display of strength. They believe it plays well to a specific political base. But the undeniable reality is that when the economic pain hits, the political narrative collapses. Border states, whose economies are deeply, symbiotically integrated with Canada, will be furious. Business leaders, chambers of commerce, and agricultural boards across the United States are already demanding that constraints be put on the executive branch's ability to unilaterally blow up the economy. American farmers, already operating on razor-thin margins, know that if Canada officially retaliates with agricultural tariffs, they will lose one of their most vital export markets. The heartland of America will bear the brunt of this so-called America First strategy. But the economic hemorrhaging doesn't stop at physical goods like lumber, oil, car parts, or agricultural produce. We have to talk about an even more insidious threat to America's long-term supremacy: human capital, venture finance, and the relentless technological arms race. Right now, there is a quiet but massive shift happening in the innovation corridors of Silicon Valley, Austin, and New York. According to some rumors, we are witnessing the very early stages of a historic brain drain, and the ultimate beneficiary is sitting right across the northern border. The undeniable reality is that top-tier talent, software engineers, artificial intelligence researchers, biotech innovators, and financial analysts, craves stability. They want to live and work in an environment where the economic ground isn't constantly shifting underneath their feet due to erratic midnight policy tweets or sudden retaliatory tariff threats. Suppose in a hypothetical scenario, the Canadian government recognized this precise vulnerability and decided to aggressively capitalize on Washington's chaos. We are hearing whispers that Canada is actively positioning cities like Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal, areas already booming as massive tech hubs often referred to as Silicon Valley North, as the ultimate safe havens for American and international tech talent. By potentially offering streamlined, fast-track visas and permanent residency for highly skilled workers who are exhausted by the unpredictable regulatory environment in the United States, Ottawa could effectively siphon off the very brains that power the American innovation engine. If you're a tech worker, an engineer, or a skilled professional, would you actually consider relocating to Canada if the U.S. market gets too volatile? Drop a yes or no in the comments and tell me why. And as any seasoned economist will tell you, where the talent goes, the massive institutional money rapidly follows. This brings us to the quiet panic currently gripping venture capital firms and private equity boardrooms. Investment capital is notoriously risk-averse when it comes to geopolitical instability and supply chain chaos. The undeniable reality is that investors are currently stress-testing their entire portfolios against the very real threat of this North American trade war. If cross-border supply chains are broken, if advanced manufacturing costs skyrocket, and if international retaliatory tariffs hit American tech hardware, the return on investment for U.S.-based startups plummets drastically. There is a controversial perspective gaining massive traction online right now: the idea that major institutional investors and sovereign wealth funds are quietly rebalancing their long-term portfolios. The narrative suggests they are preparing to shift billions of dollars in venture capital away from highly exposed American startups, redirecting that massive wealth toward Canadian firms. Why? because these Canadian companies might soon boast guaranteed, preferential access to both the broader North American ecosystem and the massive, lucrative European and Asian markets. From a purely mathematical standpoint, why would an investor lock their capital inside a company trapped behind a volatile 25% tariff wall, when they can simply fund a direct competitor a few hundred miles north that holds a golden ticket to the global market? This potential capital flight extends far beyond just startups. Large multinational corporations that currently base their North American operations in the United States are being forced to run catastrophic risk assessments. Latest data indicates that corporate executives despise uncertainty above all else. If the United States ceases to be a reliable launchpad for global export due to self-imposed trade barriers, these megacorporations will not hesitate to relocate their headquarters, their manufacturing plants, and their taxable revenue. Moving corporate operations to a politically stable, trade-friendly Canada would allow these titans of industry to bypass American tariffs entirely while still servicing the global economy. The direct consequence of this decision would be a massive hollowing out of the American corporate tax base, leading to severe austerity measures and budget cuts at the municipal and federal levels. It is a slow-motion economic suicide that goes far beyond the price tags at the local grocery store. While Washington scrambles to contain this internal fallout, we have to look at how Canada is allegedly playing this. Why is the Mark Carney masterclass narrative so compelling, even if the specific details of secret global deals are unverified? Because it highlights the difference between playing checkers and playing three-dimensional chess. The current U.S. administration's approach to trade relies heavily on bluster, threats, and erratic late-night social media posts. It is an emotional, combative strategy. In stark contrast, the hypothetical Canadian strategy represents pure, cold, calculated competence. According to some rumors, the theoretical Canadian playbook involves quietly building redundancy, diversifying economic partnerships, and creating leverage without ever throwing a public tantrum. By demonstrating a quiet willingness to walk away and build alternative global architectures, a smaller nation can completely neutralize the threats of a superpower. Whether Mark Carney is actually sitting in a room right now signing secret documents with European delegates is beside the point. The point is that the capacity for Canada to do so exists, and Washington has severely underestimated that capacity. All of this reveals the most profound long-term consequence of this entire crisis. This is about much more than just the price of lumber or the cost of a car part. This is about power dynamics, global credibility, and how the United States is perceived on the world stage. For nearly a century, the United States has been the undisputed hegemon of the global economic order. They wrote the rules and they dictated the terms, operating under the assumption that the world had no choice but to comply. But the undeniable reality is that the rest of the world is watching this North American standoff very, very closely. The European Union is watching. Japan is watching. The Global South is watching. Beijing and Moscow are certainly watching. If Washington implements policies that spectacularly backfire, causing immense self-harm to their own economy, if they get strategically outmaneuvered by a neighbor with a fraction of their population and military might, it completely shatters the illusion of unassailable American economic dominance. It sends a loud, clear, and extremely dangerous message to every capital city on Earth. The United States is no longer a rational, reliable economic partner. When you threaten your closest friends, you force them to make new friends. Suppose in a hypothetical scenario, Canada successfully proves that a mid-sized economy can create economic resilience against American pressure, maintain its sovereignty, and thrive by integrating more deeply with Europe and Asia. What is stopping every other country from doing exactly the same thing? This is the fundamental shift in the global trade architecture that experts have been warning about for years. Erratic, impulsive policy decisions driven by political theater are exactly why other nations are accelerating efforts to de-dollarize their economies and build alternative supply chains that bypass the United States. Trust is a quantifiable economic asset. Reliability is a highly valuable economic asset. Predictability is an economic asset. And right now, the current administration in Washington is burning through those assets at an unprecedented rate. When the United States negotiates with other countries in the future, those nations will remember how Washington treated Canada. They will remember the sudden, unprovoked tariff threats. They will actively build in protections against American unpredictability. They will be significantly less willing to make their economies dependent on access to American markets. This loss of soft power and economic influence will cost the United States trillions of dollars in the long run. It will impact everything from technology standards to climate agreements to international defense pacts. Because if countries do not feel economically dependent on the United States, they are far less likely to defer to American preferences in any other geopolitical arena. So, where does this leave us? The ball is entirely in Washington's court. They can continue down this path of economic self-harm, clinging to the fantasy that they can dictate terms unilaterally through threats and bullying. They can trigger a catastrophic trade war that will increase inflation, destroy jobs, and isolate the United States globally. Or they can step back from the brink. They can acknowledge the undeniable reality that Canada is a sovereign nation with its own immense leverage, and that the North American economy is a shared ecosystem that requires cooperation, not coercion. The ultimate lesson here, the truly expensive lesson that the American public will unfortunately have to pay for, is that competence matters, strategy matters. Deeply understanding the actual complex dynamics of a highly integrated global supply chain matters. You cannot simply bluster and threaten your way to prosperity in the 21st century. If Washington fails to learn this lesson, the rest of the world will gladly take notes, adapt, and leave the United States behind. Canada may not have executed a secret overnight economic coup, but they don't have to. The mere threat of their independence is enough to expose the weakness in America's aggressive posture. Friends, the geopolitical landscape is shifting beneath our feet. The era of unchecked American economic bullying may be coming to an end, not by military force, but through the quiet, calculated diversification of its closest allies. Do you think Canada truly has the structural capability to pivot its massive economy away from the United States? Or will Washington's heavy-handed tactics ultimately force Ottawa into submission? How much higher are you willing to see your cost of living go to fund this trade war? Drop your predictions, your theories, and your thoughts in the comments below. Let's get a real conversation going about the future of the North American economy. All information in this video is for analytical purposes only, not financial advice.